So if you've been hit by a company vehicle, so this is a vehicle owned by a company, whether that be a truck, a sedan, an 18-wheeler, those cases are extremely complicated. I'm going to explain the complexities, so you need to watch this video. Stay tuned. Commercial accident cases are much different than every other type of cases because there's aspects of the law that change when you're dealing with a commercial vehicle. There's additional regulatory requirements, there's additional notice requirements that could be involved. And so you definitely want to hire an experienced attorney, but I'm going to try to give you as much information as I can about these types of cases. Commercial vehicles are generally vehicles that are owned by a company or driven by an employee who's on the job at the time. And that makes these cases extremely different because you might have been involved in an accident. Let's say it's just a white sedan and you may not even know it. But then you get a copy of that police report and you see under the owner line that maybe it's owned by a business. Maybe it's a pest control company. Maybe it's a law firm. I mean, you just never know. And so it could be a situation where the policy that would apply would be a commercial policy. Generally, whether or not a commercial policy applies or not depends in many cases on whether or not the individual was on the job at the time. And this can be a big fight. I could do a whole video about this because sometimes, what is considered on the job, right? Is if a person's driving from their home to work, are you on the job? In many cases, they say no, but there are some exceptions. What about if the person's driving to a job site from their headquarters? Well, that to me would argue they were on the job. Or maybe they're driving to lunch. Well, who were they meeting at lunch? Was it a business lunch? Was it a local lunch? There's all these different factors that you'll need to have an experience and an attorney who can understand this and kind of put the pieces together as to whether or not this was a personal policy that would apply or a commercial policy. And so that's the first thing that you need to know is you need to clarify, is this a company vehicle or a personal vehicle, or was it a company vehicle used for personal reasons? Was it a personal vehicle used for company reasons? Because each one of those scenarios is going to totally depend on what coverage is being used and which one applies to your specific case. Now, if this seems way too confusing for you, if you have no legal experience at all, this is a good time for you to pause this video and call an attorney who does. Because if you mess this up, you could be leaving thousands, if not millions of dollars on the table. And so you do not want to mess this part up because your case could be forever jeopardized if you don't make the right decision. And so you're going to want a lawyer that can classify whether this was a business policy that should apply or whether or not it was a personal policy. That's the first thing, is the insurance. Which insurance applies? Who's responsible? The second thing is, even if you determine ultimately that a company is responsible, the next thing that you should know is once it's a business vehicle, especially if it's a truck, especially if there's some sort of a van of some kind, there are going to be additional requirements for that driver that won't apply if it's a personal vehicle. For example, the Georgia Department of Transportation and the Federal Motor Carrier Standards Administration, they require additional things to be done in commercial vehicles, like drivers can only drive for a limited amount of time, logs have to be kept, inspections have to be done. And I can tell you, I've done hundreds, if not thousands of cases in my career, and I can tell you that almost never are all the regulations followed like they're supposed to. It's just a sad reality. Now, there are exceptions. There are some good companies out there that do the right thing. But generally, in most cases, corners are cut. Things are not done as the regulations require. And so even in cases that you think I might have been at fault for that accident, there might be regulations that were not followed that could ultimately make it to where you're not responsible for the case and that commercial driver is, for some failure on their part to follow federal, state, or local regulations. And so you need a lawyer on commercial cases that understands what those regulations are, understands how to find the information pertaining to that regulation, and knows how to go out and apply that to your specific case. For example, There's a website for all motor carriers, all federal motor carriers, that list all the trucking companies, who their insurance company is, past violations, safety violations they've had. And most people don't even know that it exists, that it's public record, that it's out there that you can access. If you're somebody who thinks you're going to handle your case on your own, that's something that you may want to reconsider, because you might be in a situation to where there are multiple violations of that trucking company, and you may not even know how to access the website to get that information to know whether or not you have a case. And so these regulations are something that's important, and these trucking companies and these commercial vehicles have to follow those regulations. Finally, the last thing you need to know about commercial cases is that generally there are legal ramifications to whether or not the individual was working for the company, an independent contractor, signed into an app, for example, if it's an Uber or a Lyft case. And so there are a lot of aspects of the law that apply to different types of cases. For example, there's an item in the law called respondeat superior. That means that an employee was working for an employer at the time, and that employer is responsible for the actions of that employee when they're on the job. And so your case might be against the employee, but it also might be against the company that ultimately hired that employee and that employee was working for at the time of the accident. And so the failure to add that company to the lawsuit, to the claim, again, could leave thousands, if not millions of dollars on the table for your case. And so this is not something you want to mess around with. If you've been involved in a commercial case, I highly recommend that you give us a call, because this is the type of case that you really need to make sure that you're protected, because you know that commercial company is going to have high-powered lawyers that are experienced, that know what they're doing. In many commercial cases, it's not uncommon for the insurance company to have their legal team investigating the accident at the scene of the collision. And so if they're going to dispatch immediately to protect themselves, you need a lawyer immediately that's going to protect you. And so give us a call. It's a free consultation. I'd be more than happy to discuss your specific case with you here in Georgia. But if you need anything, even if you just have a question, we love giving free information to people. Pick up the phone and give us a call. If you like getting these updates about Georgia law or about big commercial accidents, obviously like and subscribe. We'll keep the updates coming. But until next time, thanks for watching.